Indigenous peoples and representatives of the network of Maroons from Caribbean community member states are participating in the 21st session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The meeting from 25th April to 6th May is being held under the theme Indigenous Peoples, Business, Autonomy, and the Human Rights Principles of Due Diligence, including free, prior, and informed consent. The CARICOM Secretariat Communication Unit sat down with Ms. Cynthia Ellis Topsey, Ambassador at Large of the Garifuna Nation, Professor Diana Fox of Bridgewater State University, Massachusetts, and Ms. Caroline Mair Toby, legal representative of the team at the UN. We had an in-depth discussion about the concerns and expectations of Indigenous and Maroon peoples as the United Nations shine the spotlight on issues affecting them.
My purpose is to represent the voice of the voiceless so far, of people who have experienced Maroonage around the world, and to interface with this international body to address the issues that concern us, particularly in the region of the Caribbean and the Americas.
Professor Fox, I know the theme for this meeting is Indigenous Peoples, Business, Autonomy, and Human Rights, Principles of Due Diligence, including free, prior, and informed consent. What does this theme mean to the Garifuna Nation or to the Maroon Nation?
Thank you, and thank you for having us. The theme is very important because Indigenous peoples have a very deep connection to the land and to the idea of indigeneity, which expresses their culture, their heritage, and the theme reflects their right to be able to make decisions, to have agency, self-determination, and sovereign decisions in what happens to the land that they live on, that they have lived on for centuries, for millennia, in fact, prior to colonial powers. And today, in spite of some of the legal decisions, such as the Saramacca Maroons of Suriname versus the state of Suriname, which requires the state to seek informed consent from the Saramacca regarding any extraction processes of minerals or hardwoods from their lands. It continues to happen throughout the Maroon lands, and this is true also in Akungpong, in the Makungpong Maroons, in the cockpit country of Jamaica, lands that the American Maroons of Trinidad and Tobago inhabit, that they have inhabited as part of the 6 companies when they fought for the British and were given land tracts. These are just a few of the examples of the many ways in which the lands and the cultures, the languages are not being perpetuated, and the agreements are being violated. And so it is critical to raise awareness of these issues so that Indigenous peoples who are protectors of the earth, who have knowledge to help sustain communities during this unfolding climate crisis, have an opportunity to have a voice and to express their knowledge and to exercise their rights to self-determination.
Ms. Ellis Topsey, you were telling me earlier before we started this interview about the importance of the Garifuna Nation being a part of this global network of Maroon people. Could you explain a bit about the significance of that harmonious representation of voices?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The Garifuna, as you may are aware, are people who were never enslaved. And so the distinctiveness about the Garifuna is that we are a bridge. We have been declared in 2001 by the United Nations, by UNESCO, as a masterpiece culture for humanity. And the gifts that we have been given in that declaration is that we have the 2 bloodstreams flowing through us. We were originally called Black Caribs, because we were combined with the Carib indigenous peoples of St. Vincent that we call Urome. And then we also have that African blood. So we have two. We experience genocide in the Caribbean, and we connect with the Maroonage spirit of Haiti, which is the first independent Maroon country in the region of the Caribbean. And so it's very important for our participation to be that bridge over troubled waters, so we can identify with the Africanness of the Maroons, who are also indigenous. And we can identify, for example, in Belize with the Mair. We are located in, we were transported or exiled to Central America, and being the only English-speaking country in Central America, we sit with the Maya. We have over 800 Maya pyramids in Belize. And so we have that distinctiveness of being able to bring together those two worlds. And so our participation with the United Maroon peoples is very powerful. And so we yesterday signed that declaration with the United Maroon peoples in terms of how we can articulate the rights that we have, because our people in the communities of the world are not necessarily informed about what our rights are. You know, as with CARICOM, with the Caribbean Court of Justice, recently, I'm talking about 10 years ago, the Maya won a major land rights case at the Caribbean Court of Justice. So we as indigenous people align with that. And what we say in this platform, that is not just about Garifuna, it's not just about Maya, it's all of us who were the first peoples here before the European structures were established. And so we'd like to have a conversation where we are affirmed and we are acknowledged and we are part of the process of governance.
Could you tell me about some of the concerns of the indigenous people going into this meeting of the UN?
One of the concerns that we have is the whole issue of climate change and environmental degradation that is taking place with our people. We were the ones who, like for example, specifically in Belize, we were settled long before the Europeans came. And I'm not just talking about Garifuna, but including Garifuna and Maya. And then we have had encroachment on our lands, on our resources, our trees, our landscape. We also, our land has been stolen. That's how we will, let's just say it as plain as that. We find ourselves losing land right under our very noses. You wake up one day and then the land, even the name of our communities have been changed. So whilst we will not take an adversarial position and approach, we want a space where this dialogue will take place to stop this abuse according to international laws, human rights laws that our countries, our governments have signed on to. We are also concerned about health, issues of health and wellness, where the contradiction is that our rainforests, for example, from which the medicines come and which are being extracted and being exploited by pharmaceutical companies, do not honor the knowledge, the intellectual knowledge and property rights of the indigenous people. So these are some of the many, many concerns. Recently in Belize, for example, we had the building of a gas station in a village called Saint Bite. And beside one of our sacred temples, our sacred churches of the Garifuna, that is unacceptable. We are concerned, for example, of artifacts that are taken out of the country by researchers coming from different parts of the world who, you know, just have it in their universities under the guise that we do not have the capacity to build museums. And our position is that our world, our landscape is a living museum. So our perspective of indigeneity is very different from the Western European perspective of indigeneity.
Dr. Fox, how is academia supporting the issues around Indigenous rights and representation?
Thank you. In a number of ways. A number of us from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and Boston, from my university, Bridgewater State, from the University of the West Indies, the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, have worked in collaboration with the Maroon contingent. I've been part of it since 2017 for helping Maroons to navigate the UN system, to register, to participate in these forums. The first participation was in 2019 when a contingent from Suriname, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a few others participated. And so we've helped with the registration process. But beyond that, we are also helping to document what are called African retentions that are present throughout Maroon communities, because Maroons have sought to sustain as best as possible in their self-liberated from enslavement communities, their languages, their cultural expressions, their spirituality, their knowledge of the land, their political and social organization. And this exists, their arts, their storytelling, this exists in different degrees throughout Maroon communities, but it is really important to recognize that there are threads that connect all of these communities. They recognize themselves, they recognize their histories. Communities that have never spoken to one another, that are now coming together, have words in common, values and beliefs in common, that have been held and sustained and nurtured throughout. Even while ethnogenesis, new cultural developments are unfolding, there have been important, especially in certain communities, for example, in Suriname, leadership roles that are directly connected to organizational procedures that existed in West African societies. So documenting this to demonstrate that there is this thread of indigeneity that carries through from African societies, and also that is now interconnected with First Peoples as relatives, because Maroons interacted with, intermarried with, cooperated with First Peoples throughout the region, and they have a shared DNA and consider themselves relatives. So there is no sense of competition for pieces of the pie of rights. Rights belong to all peoples. And so it is the responsibility of the academic team to help bring these out. We have a book project underway that includes the participation of Maroon peoples as well as members of the academic team, that shares these stories in part to document and to analyze the persistence of these cultural patterns and forms of political and social interaction that have persisted through resilience over the centuries.
It's interesting that you mentioned about those persistent and even pervasive cultural patterns within our societies, because we usually think about the indigenous people or indigenous issues as remote from the mainstream society. So it's interesting. And how do you think this whole idea of indigeneity can be diffused or can be highlighted within the wider society?
Well, what's particularly important to understand is that at the UN and throughout the international legal system, indigeneity is largely self-defined, but there are nonetheless some key attributes of being indigenous. One is the connection to the land. Indigenous peoples are earth peoples who have enormous bodies of knowledge that have been passed down through oral cultures and which have also been recorded documented in books and other forms as well, and they exist in rituals and in healing practices, and these are critically important for non-Indigenous peoples to embrace, because it is from the Indigenous peoples that the defense of the earth that we all inhabit, since the environmental movement, there's been this consciousness of spaceship Earth. We are all together, and we must acknowledge and recognize the contributions that Indigenous peoples, and specifically in this context, the Indigenous Maroon peoples, whose indigeneity comes both from Africa and from their ongoing relationships with First Peoples in the Americas. But this is critical knowledge that is important for all of our survival. And it is cultural diversity which offers opportunities to solve problems. There is a reason why we have diverse cultures on this planet. People have adapted to their environments, developed solutions that are specific to their contexts, and this is knowledge that needs to be shared and embraced because we're all in this together ultimately.
Okay, I want to bring back Ms. Ellis Topsey to talk a little about the declaration that you mentioned earlier.
Before I go into the declaration, I just wanted to comment that I used to work at the CARICOM Secretariat, and having had that experience, it became very clear to me the importance of understanding systems and how to navigate systems. I also work at different universities in the Caribbean. And with this knowledge, I'm very intent on translating or manifesting into action relevant so people who live in our communities, and to translate these processes in ways that our people can understand and can participate. It was very exciting that the heads of government meeting for CARICOM was held in Belize, for example, a couple months ago. And so my passion is to engage community leadership, to affirm and to validate community leadership, the people who live in the communities themselves, that we would be able to be present. So on our delegation, for example, we have a Mair representative for Belize, and also a Garifuna youth, because our intention is to develop a succession strategy now, because when I was a young person, and I'm still young, there were elders who intentionally reached out to me, people like myself, people like Dr. Rhoda Reddock. I could give you a long list of people who are significant now in the region. We didn't come like that overnight. We were nurtured, we were mentored, we were cultivated. And that is my passion, to give back what was done for me to the young people and children. So children and youth participation is critical now. I'm thankful that Ms. Caroline has her children with her. And so we should have a space where it's okay to have the children in the conversation. They are not an aggravation or an irritation. I'm not respecting the protocol of the show, right? But whatever we do, include the voices and have them at the center. So that is something that I'm very deep and passionate about. We had, the other thing I wanted to mention is that we had a royal visit. Prince William and Duchess Kate in Belize, and they came to Garifuna communities, and the Mair in Belize demonstrated, some of them, against the visit. In the case of the Garifuna, it's not that we disagreed with the Mair, but the approach was different. And I said to Prince William, because I had access to him, I said, you know, our people have been experiencing atrocities based on the hands of your ancestors. And they were doing the dancing and so on. But I wanted to share with him that it's not about show and tell. It's about understanding that this is part of the therapy. For us, we dance because that's the way in which we address the trauma that we experience, which is still embedded in our DNA. And that is a common element in all of us, maroon or non-maroon. So we appreciate the participation of the universities that can help us to navigate these systems. It was through Dr. Fox and Dr. Pingan that we were able to register for the UN, and thankfully for the University of Belize. But these systems are so intricate that the ordinary person, the indigenous person, would have a hard time knowing how to navigate it without the facilitation of people who are located in these institutions and structures. So we have a declaration of United Maroon Peoples. I won't read all of it, but just one or two of the points is that I just want to say that we came up with, and we are willing to share this, 20 points for the declaration. And in the declaration, we address many of the issues that we have discussed here as a united front, because as you know, they say, united we stand, and we, as a chain, we are a chain that we're locked in. And we even say to Dr. Diana and others that they are one of us, right? Because it's not just we were born from the same mother, but you have that mindset in ensuring that we're going to break this, make a paradigm shift. And this is a renaissance, because this has never happened before, where we have indigenous people and Maroon people of the Caribbean coming together, acknowledging Haiti as the first independent nation. We don't want to leave Haiti out, you know? And so this declaration we signed yesterday, and we got permission to get it signed, including those who were not physically present, the Akompong Maroons and others, and Mama G. Mama G is our woman leader, and no offense to the men, but we are the ones, we the women are the ones who are leading this track with them along with us. And that's a different set. So one of the points of the declaration, I'll just read one or two. We declare an end to racial discrimination and injustice against our African, indigenous, Maroon peoples globally in all forms and manifestation. We declare that African, indigenous, Maroon peoples globally be compensated through reparations, financially, socially, and otherwise for the crimes committed against our ancestors. We declare that our African, indigenous, Maroon communities, both children and adults, be taught an African language. So we have, that is the thread, that is the spirit that we are moving forward with. And we are articulating those ancestors who came before us. Give them that space and that recognition. None of the Maroons, Chatouye, Baroda, these are the things that if we are serious, it's not just pretty language, it is inculcating it into the existing structures of education, climate change. Talk about climate change, come to Belize. The Mair, 2,000 years ago, have the answers to all these climate change issues that we have articulated. So I just want to thank you. You know, I could take all day, I won't.
You did say you can take all day.
Yes.
I just want to bring in Ms. Carolyn Mair Toby to talk about the strengthening of the legal and legislative environment to support some of these indigenous issues in our society. Could you speak a little about that, please?
Sure I can, yes. Let me pull that up. I was going to respond to your other question before, but the Escazú Agreement, there are countries that are signatory to the Escazú Agreement. I can't read them off right now because it's not in front of me, but it's the first environmental treaty in the region that actually protects environmental defenders. And this is a huge issue right now, not only in the Maroon community, but in the indigenous community across the Amazon basin. So the Caribbean basin and the Amazon basin are very much affected. And there are some horrible statistics, you know, I think in 2019, 84 of the 167 environmental defenders were killed. We're from Latin America, and for 2020, it was 227 deaths, about more than 4 people per week. So Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Philippines, for example, But this is against a much wider backdrops of threats, intimidation, surveillance, sexual violence, criminalization, and Indigenous communities and Afro-Indigenous communities account for more than a third of those killed, which is horrifying. And although they make up about 5% of the world's population. So when you think about that, the targeting of Indigenous and Afro-descendant and Maroon Indigenous people, because that's not necessarily articulated very clearly, it's not disaggregated quite clearly there. They are being targeted in the global South. They're suffering the more immediate consequences of global warming on all fronts. And so we are the canaries in the coal mine, the small islands, the Indigenous peoples. We are alerting the world to the very real threat of climate change, and we're seeing it on the ground. But as we speak, it is contrary to interests. And so there is a lot of concern for human rights abuses as we talk about the impact of climate change on frontline communities in the Caribbean Basin, in the Amazon Basin. And I think it is important to recognize and to value not only these warnings, but the Indigenous knowledge and the scientific knowledge that comes out of these communities. So if we were to look at the MILPA system from the Garifuna, it is a fantastic system where my son is actually starting to look for me. So you will hear that right now. I'm so sorry. But but let me put this. Right, so the MILPA system is where they plant several, I think it's about 12 to 20 plants in a row. So it's not something like monocropping where you can easily harvest. It has to be nurtured, it has to be tended. There are parts that are shade, there are parts that are legumes, there are parts that are maize, so they're giving back nitrates to the soil. It's a fantastic system. Things like this are taken into account in systems like permaculture, but these originate from Indigenous communities, and this is an explicit Garifuna Indigenous knowledge. Then if you look at the American community in Trinidad and Tobago, they have the Maruga Hill rice. It does not need a saturated, boggy landscape to grow the rice. You can grow the rice on a hill, which is amazing. Think about the implications for not only food security, but food sovereignty. And it doesn't even have to be in this region. So when we talk about Indigenous scientific knowledge, it's not pie in the sky. These are real, actual solutions to soil degradation, to food security, to food sovereignty, to imports. Our imports budget is huge right now in Trinidad and Tobago. We're hemorrhaging foreign exchange. And it's a very difficult time because we've now been moribund for about 2 years with the pandemic.
Can I say that in terms of what you mentioned about food sovereignty, in the case of Belize, we noted, and this was a couple of years ago, that importation of ramen noodles was up to like $14 million worth of ramen noodles. That's an example. Okay? So this is a very important issue for us to pay attention to, especially during COVID times, that there are these food packages and bags that what was put in the food and distributed to our communities was very unhealthy. So we need to really look at that. Thank you for sharing that. And then also on a positive note, because moving forward, we're identifying these best practices, as Sister mentioned about the MILPA cycle. We had a visit recently in Belize of some Guatemalan people who had come to the United States running for their lives. They wanted to come back to what we are doing in Belize. They visit to see these practices, which are very powerful. And it shows that we can have cross-cultural fertilization of ideas and action. So that's something that we'd like to see moving forward, identifying tangible opportunities that we can develop for sharing among ourselves. We have, concerning universities, Belize has the second largest barrier reef in the world on our shores. and the University of Florida is helping us in the restoration of the reef. So these are many of the kinds of practices that we need to pull up and start to develop and get funding and equipment of our people, the people in the communities, to participate.
I also
want to
quickly
give,
add, sorry, can I add something quickly?
yes,
That
I was
is
actually
also,
going to throw it
okay.
over to you to give the last word on what are the main outcomes or achievements the network of Maroons would like to come out of this 21st session of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.
Thank you for that question. So the academic team has also played a role in raising grant funds that will help further some of these processes. But one very important aspect of participation has been to submit statements that identify the kinds of human rights violations that are occurring throughout Maroon communities and communities that are shared with First Peoples. So those have been submitted, they're entered into the record, and the contingent also met with the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Issues. We met with him yesterday. His name is Jose Francisco Calitze, and he helped the contingent to understand the process by which the Special Rapporteur can make a site visit and learn about the indigeneity of Maroon communities, as well as document those human rights violations in order to move forward so that the UN body can then make recommendations and appeal through the legal system for state parties to be able to address these violations. So ultimately, it's a process of collecting the data, of submitting it through the channels that are open to participants of the permanent forum, and drawing on the resources of the international human rights system, its various instruments, the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples, which outlines the articles of rights that are afforded to all Indigenous peoples, and to harness those to improve the kinds of conditions that the contingent is outlining are problematic. So there's an ultimate goal to uplift communities, to educate the young, to disseminate the knowledge, to preserve the cultures using this system. And the other aspect is that comes out of this is building the network. Deepening the relationships, the person-to-person relationships, the culture-to-culture relationships that allow for this unfolding social movement to really be ongoing, and for the youth of the next generation to take the mantle, because we know that the process is long, but it is unfolding as we speak.
And we also, I want to add that for CARICOM, we are very thankful that you have provided us with this space, and moving forward, we'd like to have dialogue with the CARICOM Secretariat in terms of what resources, what engagement is already there that could provide us with a space to provide technical assistance in navigating these issues now and in the future. Really appreciate it.
And we are really appreciative that you have invited us to be part of this conversation and to publicize it to the rest of the region and the hemisphere and the global community indeed. So we want to take this opportunity to wish you all the best in your further deliberations on these issues, and we look forward to interacting with you some more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.